I have a lot of joysticks, various of them, mostly because I randomly bought it because maybe I could use it in the future. Never did it anyway. Anyway, this video is about joysticks, a guide and tips for you to replace or mod your own game controller. If you're looking for a video on how to open a controller and make a detailed fix for a particular controller, this is not the video. Before anything, the difficulty level of this mod and the guide will be considered medium to hard, depending on your controller. The most challenging and time-consuming work is the soldering job. If you are still learning and have never done it before, I highly suggest you practice on cheaper controller that you are willing to lose. Common brands that you can find in the markets are ELS, Favor Union, CF, and K-Silver. Other brands like Kaihua also exist. Brands that are usually found in game controller are ELS and Favor Union. Modern game controllers come in two varieties of joysticks. The first one is from Xbox 360 or PlayStation 2 era. The second is the common joystick you see on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. The difference between these two is their footprints. The first one has a bigger footprint than the second. The design and mechanism are still the same. These two versions are not interchangeable. There are some exceptions like old third-party controllers or early PlayStation 3 controllers which might use the first generation. The first generation has a big shaft and a thin shaft. The easiest way to tell between these two generations is the part that pushes the micro switch. First, confirm which version inside your controller. There are a few unique versions like the Xbox Elite joystick. The only difference between this joystick and the rest is its screw shaft. In the same generation, they are interchangeable. That means ELS can be replaced by other brands and vice versa. The first generation, all of them come with a 10 kilo ohm potentiometer. The second generation comes in two versions, 10 kilo ohm and 2.3 kilo ohm. As far as I know, 2.3 kilo ohm is only used in DualSense controller. The rest is 10 kilo ohm. All potentiometer are linear taper potentiometer because direct translation is more useful to determine position. The potentiometer value is not interchangeable between different brands. ELS has a thicker port while Favor Union is thinner. TF has a tiny hole and is not interchangeable. Kaihua over here cannot be removed from the housing. However, within the same brand, you can replace the potentiometer with another potentiometer that has a different spec. And this is where things can get interesting. Every joystick has its own flavor, just like a keyboard mechanical switch. There are blue, red, cherry, TTC, Kaihua, and many others. Same with controller joysticks. They all have different styles. Two joysticks with similar specs from different brands can have a different feel. Take, for example, this CF joystick and Favor Union joystick. Both have same specs, 10K MB taper, but one has an axis snipping while another is felt to be more regular. One company alone can offer multiple versions of potentiometer styles. Some have a dead zone and some have a small angle. The housing can have a different feel due to the different spring constants and the material they use. Unfortunately, the market has not progressed much to demand flavors for this component. Most of the time, when you buy a component, you hope it will suit your taste. The three most important specs that you want to know are the brands, potentiometer value, and the opening angle. ELS generally make a 50-degree opening while Favor Union usually make a 60-degree opening. Third-party controllers like this FlyDigi use a Favor Union joystick with a 50-degree opening. This Kaihua joystick that was used in the MSI controller used 60 degrees with a 10K port. ELS also produce different color variations between controllers, but they actually have the same specs with slightly different housing bases. As long as it is the same brand and the same potentiometer value, it should not be an issue to swap. Another thing you might want to consider is the Thumbstick Cap, since this is by design. First-party controllers are not interchangeable between controller generations unless they have the same body profile. The Xbox Series and Xbox One S are fine, but the Xbox 360 is not. PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 also have the same issue. Both can fit onto another joystick shaft, but after they are assembled, you will realize one is too big and one is too small. It is definitely not recommended to swap controller generations. For third parties, usually you want to stick with either Xbox or PlayStation, depending on which is closest to the body design. Now that you've determined your joystick type and potentiometer specifications, either send it to someone to do the job or do it yourself. If you want to fix it yourself or make modifications, this section is for you. The item you will need are a solder iron, solder wire, plugs, a precision screwdriver, a clipper, a wet sponge or a brass wire, a third hand holder, and a real steady hand. For a soldering iron, please get at least 60 watts with an adjustable temperature. The solder iron tip is a white tip with a chisel shape and a hook because you want to hit at least 3 solder joints at the same time. For solder wire, get 60 thin 40 lead solder with 0.8mm or lower and plug inside the core. You can use 6337, but it is harder because you need higher heat. Not suitable for someone who doesn't solder much, and it actually can do more harm than good. A controller like DualSense use unleaded solder, which means you need 350 degrees to deal with it, and it's still hard to do it manually. There are a few methods to lower the temperature, like using flux or mixing the existing solder with leaded solder. I suggest doing more research on how to desolder a non-leaded solder before you proceed with any PlayStation controller. Xbox, on the other hand, from what I experienced, use leaded solder with a lower melting point. Most third-party controllers use leaded solder. You can also get a heat gun since you will be dealing with multiple solder joints, but I found it less useful for hobbies and it's also more expensive. As long as you do your works in a well-ventilated area, it should be fine. Last, be confident and have fun experimenting. To fix, first you want to examine what your issue is. Drift can be caused by a multitude of reasons. 9 out of the 10, the fix is to replace the potentiometer. If your controller has a jitter when you move the stick, it means the resistive element is scratched. In this case, you just need to replace the pot. If you have irregular circularity, it means you might have an out-of-axis wiper or your joystick didn't sit properly. If just a wiper, there is no need to desolder anything. Just bend the pot, take out the wiper and replace it with another. For the latter one, then you need to reheat all 14 solder joints at the same time and reseat the joystick. If you have drift or the center is not back to neutral, replace your pots. If your stick wobbles too much, replace the housing. Please don't expect to get perfect circularity with traditional joystick. You should have a slightly extra movement outside the circle to give your device some room when it degrades. Mixing joystick can be one way of modifying your joystick. Since different joysticks can have different behaviors, each may behave slightly differently, so you need to experiment a bit. I cannot tell you the exact way it will behave on your controller, but I will provide a general rule of what you should expect when you replace the joystick with a different specification than the original. The first one is when you place the small angle joystick with a wider angle joystick. Since it is a wider angle, you should get more movement in the diagonal area. From 50 degrees to 60 degrees, we get 2% less active area or 2% more movement outside the circle. What if you place a 10K pot with a lower value, like a 2.3K pot? Over here, you will get a much wider movement in the diagonal axis. You can expect a minor axis snap on the diagonal and the main axis. Now, what if you swap between different brands like Favorite Union 50 degrees and CF 55 degrees? Over here, you can see CF has strong axis snapping at the main axis but none at the diagonal. To sum it up, a wider angle will give a wider diagonal. Lowering resistance will increase diagonal movement and introduce axis snapping. The inverse is true when you increase the resistance value. Lastly, different brands can have different taper profile like axis snapping. The newer generation of stick is the Hall sensor joysticks, which aims to eliminate drift caused by resistive element on the potentiometer. The major player is Gulkit, whose manufacturer is K-Silver. Gameser version is another version. Also, none of these controllers have joysticks that have any spare part available on the market. If the housing fails, such as the spring or the shaft, the chances of replacing it are near zero. I wish we could change the housing or add a hot swap function, but none of the controller makers are thinking about doing this at this moment. PlayStation Edge and Victrix Pro BFG demonstrate hot swap functionality, but neither of them actually allows for directly replacing the switch. The closest idea for a joystick hot swap is on the late version of DualShock 3 controller, where replacing the joystick does not require any soldering at all. The good side of a Hall sensor joystick is that it has consistent output for a long period of time, as long as the housing doesn't go bad. This allows for different profiles to be implemented on the same joystick without replacing the sensor. As an example, Gulkit, Match Nike, and 8-Bit Do all use the same Hall sensor joystick, but they all have a different profiles. At the point of this video, we don't have the option to choose between different joystick profiles. Hopefully, this will change in the future. That's all about it. If you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, please write them down below, and I will try my best to answer them to the best of my knowledge. I think I covered the general basis of this topic, but there might be a few situations that I forgot, so ask away. Okay, bye.